give your everything, and you have to tell them a story and give them something. And I think that's the most important thing about whatever, ancient music or jazz or pop music, whatever. If you don't do that, then you miss the point of being a musician.
I had a blast connecting with today's guest. He is a kindred spirit for sure. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. We are talking today with Korneel Le Compte, who is principal bassist for the Belgian National Opera, and he is well-traveled in the early music world. I connected with him after going deep on his Viennese Tuning YouTube channel, which is outstanding. I will link up to that, along with this very cool series, the Vanhal Tapes. He's doing a similar project for the music of Asperger. So we talk about this, the lives of these past legends of the double bass, and much more. A quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation, which I enjoyed so much, with Korneel Le Compte. Good to see you too. Thank you so much for taking some time and chatting. Greetings from, I'm in San Francisco, California, and so across the continent and across a pond, but we're united here on Skype.
Yeah, I'm in Brussels, so that's a long distance away.
It's a long distance for sure. I have been meaning to visit Brussels for years and years now. One of these days I'll get there. It seems like such an amazing place. I'm a huge fan of Belgian beer and just
yes.
So I'm long overdue for a visit. But it's great. It's great to see you over Skype like this. Thanks so much.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm very honored to be on your program or your blog or whatever. I know about you. I know your name. I see cartoons passing and stuff, and I know your name and I see interviews, but I never really got into it. So I subscribed last week. I subscribed to your channel last week, and I'll check it out because I see there's so much content there. It's just amazing. It's incredible.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's been fun. It's something I've been doing. I've been doing these interviews for about 15 years now about talking to all sorts of, and I've been getting more and more into doing some historical profiles of bassists. And I started with some of the easier ones like Kusevitsky, and now I'm thinking about Vanhal and Dittersdorf and Asperger, which of course led me to your Viennese Tuning channel on YouTube, which led me to your super cool book that I've got on my iPad right here, and so which led me to naturally reach out to you because I just love to. I think it's super interesting what you're doing. Thanks for the work you've been doing. It's really incredible.
It's my pleasure. I did it out of my own selfish pleasure. So, and if I can share it with everybody, I'm just happy. I did it for myself, but it was great fun to do it. And I thought, well, it was part of my PhD project. Mm-hmm. And usually when you write a book for a PhD, the book ends up in a library somewhere, and it gets dust all over it for 50 years, and nobody ever looks at it. Mm-hmm. And I thought I'll just throw it on the internet, and anyone can read it if they want to. So that's why.
Well, I love. What isn't that the best kind of project though? Something that kind of scratches your own itch that you find interesting, and then you get to put it out in the public like that. I love your style within both the videos that you put out for the channel and also the book. It's really incredible. I have a few. Again, this has been sort of an interest of mine in recent months, and so I've picked up a few books, and yours is definitely the most engaging that I've found. It's just really interesting how you weave all this research together in a really accessible way to the person. It's academic, but in a very not in an inaccessible way. It's very accessible.
Not in an academic way.
Yes, exactly. So that's my favorite kind of reading. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, for me too. I like to read books like that where you can really relate to what you read. It's not just on some level where you can understand it, but you don't relate to it. And I like to read those kind of books as well. So I want to feel what the person who wrote the book, I want to feel this passion and this enthusiasm. And if I can transmit that, I'm very happy.
Well, it's very relatable, and the way that you weave photos and musical examples, and you sprinkle in quotes from different places, is just very, very interesting. It reminds me of I read all sorts of subjects, but there's a wonderful author named Sudhir Venkatesh who writes about public housing in the United States. Oops. Are we back? Okay.
You're back.
Okay, good.
It just froze for a
yeah,
second.
that's okay. Welcome to the internet. Well, it reminds me of an author named Sudhir Venkatesh. He wrote 2 books. One was in an academic style, and it was about housing projects in the United States. And then he wrote one called Gang Leader for a Day, also about housing projects. But that was the one that was a bestseller, the academic one. And they were about the exact same topic. So you've got the Gang Leader for a Day version of... And you went back to school. Were you 50 when you went back to school? I was watching one of your videos about, okay.
Yes. Actually, I went back twice. I went to conservatory when I was around, I think in my 20s. I don't remember. It's too long ago. And then I went back when I was 50 because they changed the diploma, the degree. They changed it from the French system to a more international master system. And I thought, well, it's a good occasion to see if I'm still up there. And so that was on the modern bass. So I redid everything, all the subjects, harmony and everything, the whole thing, not just the bass, but everything. And then I think around 5 or 6 years later, I went back to a conservatory to study ancient music and to study the historical bass and the gut strings and stuff. Because all you hear when you're in the, let's say, in the modern classical music field is that, those guys who play Baroque, they play Baroque because they can't play, and it's awful and it's out of tune. Okay, I'll grant them that it's out of tune. But there's so much cliche going on, and I wanted to find out for myself what was true about it, and if there was something that I was missing, and I was missing a lot. And that was the third time I went to conservatory, and that was actually the time I went there for 3 years, studying ancient music, and that was the best time in my whole musical education. It was like an avalanche of knowledge and of open-mindedness, which I didn't expect. I thought these Baroque people, they're all so closed, and they think they know the truth and they know everything, but actually not at all. Every lesson was, well, we think, but we might be wrong. Maybe in 10 years they're going to laugh at us, but what we think now is this. And that was so refreshing to find this attitude and to all this knowledge and to read all these treatises and all these books and all these ancient things, Leopold Mozart and Quantz and stuff. It was so, and I'm still overwhelmed by it even today. So yeah, it was fantastic.
Isn't it interesting how the more you get into it, the more questions you have? You think that maybe I'm going to find the answer, but and you describe that in your book too. The deeper you go, the more you realize how uncertain people are. And for people, I sort of flirt with Baroque playing. We'll say, like I played many a gig at A430 on steel strings. They hire me because I'm a good player, but they can't find somebody who's a little more. So I love that music. I have a lot of friends who work in that area. Where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, that's a real hot spot for early music in the United States. So it's interesting, but someone from the not in that world might think that people are very firm in their opinions, like, oh, this is the way to do it. I need to. But it's interesting how actually, we think we might know, but we're learning as we go. I find that such a fascinating thread in what you've written. Yeah,
that was fantastic, and maybe it's not like that everywhere, all over the world. I went to Brussels Conservatory, and we had some really great names there. We went to Kirken Brothers and, the really big names. And these people were so open-minded and so not really sure. We guessed. We have, let's say, 75%. We believe it could be, but we're not really sure. And that was mind-blowing. It was fantastic to have these great names, international names with 30, 40-year careers in ancient music, almost the inventors of the new ancient music. And these people were kind of, maybe, but let's try this way, or let's try this. We're not really sure. Let's read the treatise again, because they contradict each other, and sometimes, this guy says this and this guy says that, and it was fantastic. And I'm still full of enthusiasm about what they taught me and how much it influences my musical life today. Even today we recorded the third movement of the Fourth Concerto just between us, my wife and me. It was great fun, and we improvised, because people think improvising in music, that's in the domain of jazz. But we improvise as well, but we don't really improvise so much with melodies and stuff, but you improvise with tempos and pressure and with all these little details that make the music come alive. And it's never the same twice. We play it twice and we play it differently. And let's try this and let's try that. Yeah. And let's try different articulation and see what comes out of it and make this music come alive instead of sticking to the score. Because, the worst thing you can say to a music student is play what's written. Mm-hmm. You should never play what's written. That's nonsense. If you want to hear really what's written, you just put it into a computer, let the computer play it, and then see if that's music that comes out of the computer. It's not. You need something more. The score is just the basis. There's no music there. I can't hear anything. So that's what I always say. If you think this is music, this is just ink on paper. See, so it's interesting to find these parallels. Improvising, there's so many elements in music where you can improvise things that are not written in the score, where you have the freedom to kind of discover and explore, of course, based on the knowledge you think you have from the treatises. Of course, you have to know this, and you have to know what was probably not allowed, or was probably not done, or what could have been done. And this gives you a great freedom in your playing. It's fantastic.
This episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. These are hand-built microphones out of Portland, Oregon, and they make an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. Barry Green got to try out this mic at our 2020 online bass summit where Ear Trumpet Labs was a sponsor, and he was singing its praises all weekend long. It's an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. It's durable and works with in-ears, monitors, you name it. Not to mention, Christian McBride, Barry Bales, and Missy Raines are all Nadine users. Whether it's classical, jazz, Americana, or bluegrass, this mic seriously delivers, and they're offering a free t-shirt, especially to Contrabass Conversations listeners with a purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out Nadine. I am so proud to have my course with Discover Double Bass Beginner's Classical Bass out in the world. This was a long time coming, friends, and this course is designed, as the name implies, for beginner bassists who want to learn how to play classical music or for more experienced players who wish to revisit the foundations of technique. The course is comprised of 66 lessons over 4 hours and covers a wide range of topics on classical bass, which will make a real difference to you playing. It is the perfect course for beginners. I feel weird saying that since it's my course, but I definitely believe in it, to build a solid foundation of double bass technique and to help you feel confident playing. Many of the lessons include transcriptions of the pieces, exercises, and etudes, so you have everything you need to practice at home. I spent hundreds of hours putting this together over the last few years. I'm so glad to see it out in the world. We have a link to it in the show notes, or just visit discoverdoublebass.com/Jason Heath. It's interesting, those parallels between early music and jazz. It's such a great, I think you might have brought that up in some of those interview videos that you had on your channel. But, if you just think about it, if we just looked at the lead sheet of Autumn Leaves and we played that and said, that's the music. No, it's not. No one would ever do that. And so it's fascinating, but we, at least I and people raised probably like me might think that, you think you're playing whatever piece, you name it, let's say Handel Messiah, it's all there on the page. No, it's not. There's so much.
Not. Oh, yeah. No, it's not. Yeah. It's not. And very often, actually, what you should, I'm a bit reluctant, but what you should play in Baroque music, especially as a bass player, maybe you shouldn't play everything that's in the bass part. Mm-hmm. You have to listen. When are you important? When should you simplify your bass part? It was done. It was done throughout the centuries. You see what's necessary in this moment. What is the singer doing? What are the other people doing? How can I contribute to the total thing? I'm not just playing the stupid part from the page. You have to see, maybe I should drop out here. Maybe I should simplify the 16 notes. Maybe I'll just play the beats, bring everything back together, because sometimes it just kind of disappears and it becomes chaotic. And then the bass player has great power to bring things back, bring the flock back to, and you just give an accent on the beat, waff, waff, here it is, guys. And then, see, and that's how it works. You can't just say, I'm putting the score on my stand and I'm just playing you can't do that.
Yeah. Wow, it's incredible to think about. I've been thinking more and more about Viennese tuning, which is something that back when I was in university, I went to Northwestern University in Chicago, in the middle of the country, and they have a good early music scene there too. And I remember some Baroque bass players coming in and playing in that tuning and demonstrating Vanhal. And I remember thinking like, wow. And it's funny watching videos the last couple months, Viennese tuning, it doesn't necessarily make those pieces they makes them different. They're still not easy.
They're still difficult.
Yeah. But it just changes. And I love the way in your book how you sort of show ways that people can experiment with that tuning using steel. I think there's maybe a perception that if people want to experiment, they have to go full on, get a full set of gut strings, a different instrument, a Baroque bow, and you provide some nice kind of baby steps for exploring the tuning.
Yeah, but that's how I learned it. As you can read in the book, my first contact with Viennese tuning was, of all pieces, Per questa bella mano. Yeah. And we had a singer at the opera, and he said, I have to sing this for my exam. Do you know this piece? And I said, sure, I know it. Could you play it with me? I said, okay, I'll play it. And I'd never played it before. So I got the music, and I thought, well, this sounds awful on a modern bass. This is just not going to work. And I had the Praniaski book, Geschichte des Kontrabasses, and he talks about it. It's in German. I don't think there's an English translation. But so I read about it, and I thought, well, I have two basses. Let's just tune one to this weird tuning and see how it works. And a week later, we had our first rehearsal, and and I went from there. And that was a modern bass with steel strings, with a modern bow and no frets, and that's how I started. And then you get sucked into it. The sound is so, I can really only encourage bass players to try it. Just try it. You take an A and a D and a G, one semitone lower, and a top A from solo set, and you have your strings, modern strings. And then you try and you play around with it, and you'll never go back to the modern bass. You'll go back to it, but you'll go back with a different mindset, because this sound is it's so incredible, it's so resonant, it's so free, silvery. Your bass doesn't sound like your bass anymore. It sounds like a different instrument.
I remember having a conversation with Dean Farrell, who you bring up in your book, who I've had a great time getting to know Dean. Anybody who knows that name will probably be smiling right now.
He's a fantastic guy.
And talk about somebody who embraces what I think of as like the punk rock spirit of early music in such a beautiful way. Dean was telling me, as someone who really embraces different tunings, right? I mean, and I remember Dean telling me a story about he was playing some jazz gig somewhere and had tuned everything, I think up a half step or something, which all of a sudden opens up all sorts of open string possibilities in jazz keys of B flat and E flat. And some bass player came running up to him on the break and was like, "What the heck are you doing?" Because he could see that he was playing all these harmonics and things and over tuned. So it's interesting how and I've done very little experimentation on my own with alternate tunings, a little bit here and there, but it's amazing how that starts to change your perception of the bass when you start to experiment with that.
Oh yes. And it's interesting because you can do that in a minimal way too. For instance, if you have the Beethoven Sixth Symphony, if you tune your lowest string to F instead of E, everything's easy. It's no problem, because it's really difficult, with the tune to E is really difficult, and you have these things in F and you don't know how to play it, and it sounds messy. You just tune your lowest string a semitone higher, and everything's easy. And I think that's what was done historically very often, that you just adjust the tuning to whatever you play. Anyway, that's what I do. I use a viola da gamba tuning on my bass as well. Sometimes it's much easier, it's more convenient, and it sounds better. Yeah, that's the main reason. It sounds better.
It reminds me of a couple of years ago, this wonderful bassist, Daxun Zhang, who's a great soloist.
Yeah, I know his name.
Yeah, he teaches in China now at the Juilliard, the new school there. But he was playing the Bach First Cello Suite, and he dropped the A string down to a G, and he told me he does that all the time, and it's amazing how much it opens up possibilities. Not that it can be done without that, but it's just incredible what a little tuning readjustment, like you're saying with Beethoven Sixth, and it sounds like that was. Or what we think we know is that low string was kind of a wild card, right? Like people would adjust that in different.
Yeah, sure. I have my couple of not the red one. It's in Viennese tuning as well.
Oh wow, that's a Bussetto. That's a Bussetto bass, right? Isn't that a?
That's an Eminence.
Oh wow.
Eminence electric double bass.
Oh cool.
But It's a 4-string. I have a 5-string as well. But on the 5 strings here, the 5th string, I tune it according to what the piece needs. Usually I have a low D in Viennese tuning, but sometimes you need an F or an F sharp or an E. I think Dean always tunes usually he tunes his lower string to E. But very often I have it on the low D, which makes the bass resonate even more, because when you have the piece in D and the low string kind of vibrates sympathetically with all the rest, and you get a fuller sound as well. Even if you don't use the D string, it makes the bass sound better.
I remember talking to John Feeney a few years ago, who's really does a lot of period playing in New York City.
Yes, I know.
And he's got a great video that one of the ensembles he plays with put out about just the analog nature of gut. You know, how there are like layers within layers to gut. And when I was talking to him, I said, because he plays all these modern gigs as well, and he said he plays the same strings every single gig. He's just tuning up to 440, tuning down, and he was just talking to me about how much more resilient gut is to those tuning changes. Am I describing that kind of correctly?
Exactly. It's something that's very difficult to do with steel strings, because they already have what I think is a ridiculously high tension. I can play on a steel string bass. I did a gig at the opera a couple of days ago on steel strings, and I can play on steel strings, but I find this tension so ridiculously high as compared to gut strings. And the gut strings are very flexible in that way. You can tune them up and you can tune them down, and it just works. And you can't do that with steel strings. You can tune your orchestra strings up to solo tuning, but it's really hard. Then you have to lower your bridge, or you just can't do it. It's not, you don't have the same flexibility. And with gut strings you can go very far. I've been playing the Fourth Concerto, which is in F, is Viennese tuning in F, so that's a minor third higher than the standard Viennese tuning. And both of my Charton basses were in C in F, because I like to try out different basses for the piece I'm playing. And then I had another thing to play in normal Viennese tuning, and I just tuned the strings down a minor third. It just works, you know. You tune up, you tune down. It works.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico. And one of the things that struck me about Dorico when I first opened it up was this innovative user interface design. There are 5 different modes. There is setup, write, engrave, play, and print mode. And here is Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on why they set it up like this.
As they are presented to you on the screen, they're kind of there in a strip at the top left-hand corner of the screen, and they're very prominent. You can whack them with your mouse, or if you're using a Surface, you can tap them with your finger, and that basically then changes the whole UI of the program.
It is such an innovative design. It makes working for me so much cleaner in music notation software. I have become such a fan. I use this piece of software every single day. Check them out at Dorico.com. That'll take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And there's a free version, Dorico SE, that'll let you do practically everything the program does with up to 2 parts. So that's perfect if you're working with a student or making exercises or that kind of thing. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Dorico.
You can't do that with steel strings.
No, I remember back before I had an extension on my bass, and I had to play a low C, tuning my E string down to a C, and it works, but just barely. And if I tried to play forte, it would flap against the bass. Yeah, it's not nearly as tolerant.
Yes, of course, it's a very good observation. Of course, it's also related to the kind of volume and the kind of sound you're going to make. And you have to... What I find with gut strings is it teaches you to play with a much more sensible approach. You get so sensitive about pressure and about producing the sound. And when you have this feeling, because gut strings are very temperamental in a way, sometimes they whistle and they make all kinds of noises, which I love. I don't like perfection, which that suits me fine. So I don't have... We strive for perfection. We'll never get there. And I like this. It's a human kind of quality. When you hear an untrained voice, a pop singer or a rock singer, it's not technically perfect. But I prefer that to a perfect opera singer. I shouldn't say that because I'm working at the opera for almost 40 years. I shouldn't be saying these things. But it's the same with gut strings. They have these imperfections in the sound, and you have to be careful with the attack. But they give you so much color.
Yeah.
And then when you come from the gut strings and you play on steel strings, you're more sensitive to the steel string as well, and you can play much better, and you can really imitate the gut sound on steel strings once you know the gut strings. So it's enriching. I really encourage every bass player to try gut strings from time to time, just to get this closer connection to the instrument and to the bow and to the string, and to become more sensitive. And this sensitivity you can transpose to the modern instrument, and you get a whole new dimension in your playing. But like you said, if you play really fortissimo and you tune your steel string down to a low C, it's not really going to work.
That's for sure.
But it's the same with the gut strings. You can't go to really extreme loudness when you tune your strings down too much. But in general, gut strings, I found, in the years that I've been playing gut strings, I think they sound, at a distance, they sound stronger. They give a bigger sound than steel strings. Maybe not under the ear, maybe not right there where you are, but at a distance, they seem to travel through the air better than steel strings. I don't know how that works, how that physically is explainable, but that's my impression.
Yeah, it's so interesting, those acoustical phenomena like that, that. And I remember chatting with Gary Carr, not about gut strings, but about that phenomenon too. What it sounds like out in the hall versus under your ear, and it seems like such a stark difference for bass. I remember so many experiments when I was trying out to potentially buy a new instrument on stage playing, go out in the hall, halfway out in the hall and listen, and just how radically different that sound is. Yeah, and I've heard that about gut strings too. You've got a great description. Another thing that I love about your book, you have a very fair-minded look at gut and pros and cons, and you even discuss the environmental implications of gut. Right? Yes. It's like you look at it. You have, I don't remember the exact line, but it's like looking at a hillside of sheep, and all of those sheep for one gut string.
For one string.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's incredible, and of course. This brings me to, we could be talking all night. I could be talking all night, sorry. You have to stop me. Okay. But no, this brings me to, because you talk about environmental impact, and yeah, we're so much more aware now of environment and climate change and these things. So music is important, but there are more important things in the world right now. And of course, when you play gut strings, these things cross your mind. Animals have to die for your strings. Okay, they die for the meat, and the gut is a byproduct. So this kind of eases my conscience a bit. They don't kill them for the gut strings. Right. But still, it's everything's connected. So there are some alternatives. I've tried everything I could lay my hands on. Nylon strings, and you have these German strings, gutter-like. They're called gutter-like, and they're a bit like gut. They're not really so much like gut, but on some bases they work quite well. And I tried all kinds of synthetic strings, and to see how close I can get to to a different kind of sound, not necessarily a gut sound, but a different color that inspires you, because that's one of the reasons I try to explain to my dear wife why I have so many basses, because I need them, because they inspire me. I have a few bows as well. Oh my goodness. I have more, but I mean, every bow and every bass and every different string brings out something different, and you get feedback from that, and you play differently. Yeah. And it's the same with some people have 200 electric guitars. I mean, I can relate to that, because every instrument gives you a different feedback, and it inspires you and makes you play differently. Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's incredible. And you're reminding me of Paul Ellison, the wonderful bass teacher here in the United States, teaches at Rice University, and is also passionate about early music. You walk into his studio, and it's like a showcase of bows. He has so many bows. He's always looking for the right bow, and he's really into Baroque bows and Dragonetti bows and all sorts. And my experience is, I remember putting D'Addario's Zayek
biax strings on my bass, which are
Exactly.
synthetic, but a little more with gut characteristics than some others.
Yes,
and I remember playing some solo music, and I could play a harmonic on the top string and go get a cup of coffee and come back, and it was still ringing. And I remember thinking, I definitely can't take these into my San Francisco Symphony gig that I'm subbing for, but for the solo recital coming up, it's like perfect. And so it's so interesting how it changes the way you approach the instrument, the strings or the bows. Yes. And so that it has and what you're describing with the electric guitars, it's a little tougher for bass since they're so big, but it really is. It's incredible what a difference a different bass and obviously different strings and different bows. Yeah, it really changes your artistic approach.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the fascinating things about opening your mind and seeing what's around and what. Like I say, I try everything I can put my hands on. If there's sometimes I buy secondhand strings on the internet, a string that I don't know. I've never tried this one. I passed an occasion last week. There were some Mark bass strings for double bass.
Wow.
Secondhand, and I was too late. They're sold. But I was very interested to try these because from the description, they seem really interesting, and they're a bit thicker than the modern steel strings. I like thick strings because I'm used to the gut strings. Yeah. I don't like thin strings. So if I can, I'm not going to order them and buy them brand new. I'm not a millionaire, but I think I have about 200, 300 strings lying around here.
Wow.
So I should calm down now. But of course, if something new, if something promising, something that that will inspire you to play differently or to find through the material, you find something new in the music as well. Oh, wow, I didn't know. And the good thing about changing material is it changes your technique. Because, for instance, every time I play the same piece on a different bass, I find that I have to use slightly different fingerings or a different articulation, because on this bass, basses are very temperamental. They're very, they're not all the same. They don't sound well in every position. And some basses sound very good here and some don't. And so you can't have your fixed fingering for everything. And that's the way I'm going to do it. You can't. So that's one positive thing. For me, it's positive. Mm-hmm. For some people, maybe it's a negative because you want to have your things square and clear, and that's my fingering. But I like to change, and sometimes I use a different bass. I have to use a different fingering because I feel it doesn't respond the way it should.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the nature of bass players. We're tinkerers a little bit, probably a bit like electric guitarists or some of these other instruments too, where we're just trying we're always exploring. I have been, as been reading your book and doing more bass research in general, this pandemic's given me more time than I expected. So that's been one of my things.
That's one of the positives.
Yeah, for sure. I can't help but thinking, like, what? It still boggles my mind. Like Vanhal, Sperger, these people, these 18th century bass virtuosos, and just like what life was like doing that, playing that. I mean, it's incredible when you think about how long ago that was, that these people were doing what they're doing. Like, I've been working on a video about Dittersdorf, and then like realizing Vanhal was one of his students, and it's just what a fascinating era for our instrument, right?
Oh, incredible. Sometimes I wish I were a fly on the wall, and just for 10 minutes or for an hour, And actually, it's very interesting because recently we posted a video, because I should explain, we're doing a Sperger project with a few colleagues. We're going to record the 18 concertos in whichever way, preferably on the Viennese bass, but anything goes on a modern bass, but all 18 of them, because right now only 3 or 4 are played because they're okay on the modern bass. So now I've got all the manuscripts from the library in Mecklenburg. They send everything to me. And so we're dividing the work. I'm working on 1, 2, and 4. So 4 is getting along now, and then okay. So we have these pieces, and then when you see how demanding those pieces are and how difficult they are, even on the Viennese bass, these guys must have been incredible players. And we made a video of the adagio of the Fourth Concerto, and actually we made a recording during a rehearsal, and we did something wrong with the microphone. We're very stupid with technology, and we didn't plug it in properly, and there was a hiss through the whole recording. It was just rehearsal anyway. And it gave me an idea that, well, if I add more hiss to it and crackle and pretend that it's an old recording. And so we did that, but actually the second idea was even more extreme. I thought, if we add, have this theory, fictional. Sperger was rehearsing this piece in this hall, and today there's an engineer who can extract sound from the bricks in the wall, and he can extract the sounds from 200 years ago. And so you have these sounds of Sperger rehearsing, but also the sounds of people talking and animals, because it's near a farm and stuff. So we had this whole soundscape that we wanted to add to the music. You hear cows and horses, and you hear the fire crackling, and you hear this music by Sperger that they have extracted from these walls. That would have been fantastic, but well, maybe some other time.
That's a great idea. I hope you do that. That's something that strikes me, especially as somebody living in the United States, where our oldest building is from 1780. Here in San Francisco, the oldest thing is 1850. I was in Lucca, Italy, a couple of years ago for the European Bass Congress, and just sitting in that hall and knowing that that was Paganini's hall when he would come to Lucca, and walking by, where Boccherini's statue, and I mean, it's so amazing to think about those instruments and those voices like you're describing, and just that immediacy, that connection that you have in so many places in Europe. I just find that incredible to this music.
Oh yes, absolutely. So that's what gave me the idea, because you play this music and you read about these people. Sperger, he had animals. He had to, he didn't earn enough money, or I don't know why, but he had a cow, and so that was part of his life as well. Mm-hmm. He played in the orchestra, and he went home and he took care of his cow and milked the cow, and that's, like you said, it's so fascinating to try and imagine how people lived back then, and what kind of soundscape they had. Now we have modern soundscape, we have airplanes flying over, and we have traffic, and we have but they had a totally different soundscape, and they had totally different smells as well. Mm-hmm. So it was a totally different world. It was very different from what we live now. And I always wonder, if we hear the same music, even imagine we play the same music that they played 250 years ago, and they played exactly right, like they played it, we wouldn't hear it the same way, because our ears are accustomed to a different soundscape. So the impact of the music could be different, even if it was played exactly the same way. That's why this whole idea of authenticity, for me, authenticity doesn't exist. It's impossible, even if we can't. But if we manage to play exactly like the people back then played, we wouldn't hear it the same way.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. It's something I think about if you look at a book from the 19th century, just the pacing of prose, or even if we think of movies, something more recently, if you think of the way a movie in the 1950s was shot, even like the credits, 10 minutes of credits at the beginning of a movie versus something these days where, boom, there's nothing. It's and just how profoundly, these are all huge topics, but they're fun to talk about, how profoundly the impact of having recordings, these 100 years or so that we've had recordings, or a little over, where there was nothing. That music was played and that's it, right? Like just how things were passed through the generations, or how people experienced that, or the excitement of going to concert where that's the only time you could hear that music. It's incredible to think about what the concert experience must have been like for the performers, for the people there. Oh yes, what the audience was like. It's so, and how little. I mean, we have resources, we have primary texts, we have paintings, we have, accounts, but how much we don't have. We really are filling in so many of the gaps.
Yeah, I find that immensely fascinating, and I read so much about it. There's so much to read, also by modern authors. Taruskin has written so extensively about ancient music, and about the nonsense of authenticity, and about the sense of trying to make sense of it all, and where probably we're wrong in our way of thinking. But it's an immensely fascinating subject, and sometimes I go to bed and I take an ancient treatise, or I read Diderot's autobiography, and I read that and I couldn't stop reading because it's every page is full of surprises and how people lived back then. And he's very full of himself, Dittersdorf. You can see that, but at the same time, it's so interesting to see how they lived and how his life went and how life at the court went, and you just wished you could be there just for a while, maybe an hour, or just to have this impression and bring it back to the modern world. So, yeah.
I know. I'm reading that right now. It's funny because I put out a video about Dragonetti, I think, and then Leon Bosch, who's a friend and colleague, he said, have you read Dittersdorf's autobiography? And I immediately looked it up and downloaded it. And yeah, it's such a fascinating window into that life, right? And what a fascinating musical, to be a fly on the wall for 10 minutes, like you said earlier. What we learn from that.
Oh, yes. And yeah, it's mind-boggling. And I'm very happy I did this ancient music thing and I pushed myself to do it because I was full of, I can't say the word, but full of this attitude that, we modern musicians, we are the real musicians, and those Baroque people, that's because they're not good enough to, and it changed my whole outlook on music. And I was challenged into it because actually, I said it in the book, I had a discussion with one of the teachers at the conservatory, and I said, if Bach had a Steinway grand piano, he would never have written for the harpsichord. And the gentleman was very upset, and he politely but very violently disagreed with me. and that made me think, because, well, maybe I'm the stupid one. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that, maybe. And he gave me some really good arguments why what I was saying was just nonsense. And that's when I thought, okay, I have to go to school and I have to learn about these things, because I'm talking bull.
Yeah. Well, if Bach had a digital audio workstation and a synthesizer, what would have happened? It's incredible. It's incredible to think how new some of the things that these composers were working with were at the time, right?
Oh,
how
absolutely.
These innovations. We look at, we could think of so many examples, but Mozart, like the Clarinet Concerto. How old was the clarinet at that point? Not too. I think it was relatively recent. So, we could think of many, Schubert and the Arpeggione, or we could name hundreds or thousands of other examples. But how we look historically, how these composers embraced change and they embraced the new, and it's just it's really exciting, and it's so weird in a way to look back from our perspective hundreds of years in the future, and of course it'll be a different game for people hundreds of years from now because we have all these recordings and everything. If we don't blow ourselves up somehow, this will all be preserved in a different way. But yeah, it's who knows what these people would have done with the, who knows if the orchestral resources of Berlioz's time had been available in Bach's time, what he would have written. I mean, we just we can't say.
No, we have no idea. So it's interesting because you say from our perspective. So what I always try to do, what I always try to tell my students, is to make a big jump and go back, let's say, 500 years, and then approach ancient music from that side instead from our side. Because you go, romantic music and classical music, and we go in the wrong direction. These people came from the other side. They came from very ancient, let's say the Greeks, but let's say from the Renaissance music. Renaissance, and then you have what we now call Renaissance and Baroque. These people didn't know they lived in the Renaissance, and they didn't know they lived in the Baroque period.
Right.
That's what we call them now, but they didn't know that. But if you approach it from there, and you try to see how this thing evolved out of that, and that came, and then you discover things like, for instance, the Viennese classical music is very much steeped still in the Baroque tradition. And on the other hand, it's already pointed to the Romantic period. You see that in Sperger's music, and a lot of the Viennese-based music, some of the articulations, some of the things are really, really Baroque. Really Baroque articulations. And in some, like in the adagios, in Sperger's lyrical stuff, you already see him going towards the Romantic. And so you have this period of Viennese classical music, which is really, where you really see this evolution from very old traditions, Baroque, and you see the evolution, and the elements are mixed together, and you have the same, within the same piece, you have the Baroque and you have the Romantic, and you have this whole thing flowing through history. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's so easy to look back, especially when we have these neat and tidy labels, right? Nobody was thinking, I am living in the classical era, which will go on for 10 more years, and then we'll have a transition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything looks so neat and tidy in the rearview mirror for most people, right? But in the moment, we don't know what's happening next, and it's chaos. And then of course, just the experience of not having the luxury of recordings or being able to travel as far or being able to communicate like we could, in the future. It's fascinating. You have given me so much to read in what you've looked at in this book. It's just so incredible to think about. So I got, I don't know if it was a recommendation from you, but I got Paul Brune's New History of the Double Bass? Yeah. So I started reading that, and early on, I'm only 20, 30 pages into the book, but he was talking about just where the bass comes from, which I have, I have probably misinformed hundreds of people over the years saying, oh, it's really from the gamba family, and then the violin family adopted it. It seems like it's, how clear is that? It sounds like Paul's assertion is that the bass evolved alongside the violin family, and the gamba was its own thing. And I'm sure you've done a lot more reading than me on the topic. And this is a huge topic. Sorry, but
yes, no. It's an interesting question, and actually there's no clear answer. It's not as clear cut as it comes from the violin, or no, it comes from the violone, or it comes from the gamba. It's not like that. So there's so many missing parts in the puzzle. We don't really know, and you see that in the different types of basses. You see basses that are just big gambas, and you see basses, even very early basses, that are just big violins. It's not something that came later. You see really early double basses that are really violin shaped, and you see basses that are just as old and that are really gamba shaped, and you can't say this comes from this or this family. And then you have all the mixed forms, of course. You have the flatbacks and the swellbacks and everything. So this whole discussion, I used to be really interested in that, and we had a lot of master classes and seminars by real scholars, because you have to be careful with these books that are written by bass players, like Paul Brune and Planiavsky. I have great admiration because it's amazing. The book he read, I have 2 editions. The first one was like this, and the second one was thick like this, and it's in German. Okay, thank God I learned German at university, so I can read all these things. But then you hear the real musicologists and the real specialists, and they say, well, actually, he's got it pretty wrong, and this guy's got it pretty wrong. And it's understandable. We're bass players, and we love our instrument, and we want to find out about our instrument, and we want to find out where it comes from. And we kind of exaggerate, and we think we're not musicologists. Very few. I don't know any bass player who's really a schooled musicologist with a musicology education. So we take wild guesses, and even the musicologists make wild guesses, but they're a bit more educated. So in the end, actually, it doesn't matter.
That's true. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And that's maybe if there's one conclusion from this whole book that I wrote, is that ancient music or modern music or pop music or rock music, if you don't tell a story, it's just worth nothing. If you follow all the precepts and all the rules, and you play it correctly, and you play everything in tune and beautifully, but you're not telling a story, then what's the point? Because music is meant to be listened to be communicated, to bring some emotion to the listener. And the listener has to be moved in some way. It has to do something. It has to change the person you're playing for. He has to, or she has to, leave the concert a different person, slightly different, maybe just for 10 minutes, or maybe for a day, sometimes for a whole lifetime. I always tell my students, if you have to play the same show, like in the opera, sometimes 10 times, 20 times, the same thing, and my colleagues, they get bored, and I say, don't get bored. Maybe there's somebody in the hall tonight for whom this show is going to change his or her life forever. Never forget that. And I think that's so important. I'm fascinated by all the history and the treatises, and I can read them like detective novels. And it's a passion. I want to know about these things. But in the end, you have to go on stage, and there's people in the hall, and these people have done a lot of things to be there. They have to take a babysit, and they didn't have the time to eat, and had to take a parking place, and they had to pay a ticket. And they're there. And then you have to give them something. You can't just say, well, I'm just playing what's written. No, you have to engage, you have to give your everything, and you have to tell them a story and give them something. And I think that's the most important thing about whatever, ancient music or jazz or pop music, whatever. If you don't do that, then you miss the point of being a musician. Yeah. That's what I think.
Yeah, well, I'm right there with you, and it's so easy to become used to it or jaded or whatever as you're playing.
Yes.
Years after years, decades after decades. But it's always inspiring to me to find people like you and your journey who have continued to be inspired and go back to school later in life. That I just think that says a lot about your curiosity, and I'm always inspired by people who have that fire and keep that fire going, and it's so interesting. I was one other thing I really wanted to ask you about that you do describe in the book is okay. So let's just take the Dittersdorf Concerto. We talked about Dittersdorf a bit, which is in D major, or it's an E major, or it's an E flat major, or it's a huge topic. But just that whole history of tuning up and which leads to additions or Vanhal in both C, D, and E, depending on what we're talking about. It's yet another complicated thing in our bass history.
Yes. It just goes to show how much these people try to experiment to see what's best, what's the best thing to do. So, like I said, we have this Fourth Concerto of Sperger in F, Viennese tuning in F, a minor third higher than the standard tuning. It's the only concerto that he wrote in that key. He went to E flat and he went to E, but only once he went to F. It's amazing how they try to find the best solution for that piece. How can I make it better? How can I sound better? How can I escape this eternal D major? How can I find another tonality that speaks, or that gives another affect, as we say in German, another emotion? Because if you change tonalities, that's a huge subject as well. But you change tonalities, you change not only the sound and not only the projection, but also the character of the scale of the tonality you're playing in. So that's enormously fascinating to see to what lengths they went to do that. And it makes you wonder, for instance, in F, what did he do? Did he take his regular bass and tune the strings up to F? I tried it, and that's becoming really hard. So did he have thinner strings just for this occasion? How did he do it? And I can't sleep. I just figured out how he did it. How did he do it? What practically? How did he do it? Did he have another extra bass? I have a theory, anyway, that he had two. And it's too long to explain. I think he had two different basses with two different tunings. And when you look at his fingerings in his orchestra stuff, in his orchestra accompaniments, in his just bass playing stuff, and you see the fingerings he uses, I have a sneaking suspicion that he used tuning in fourths for his orchestra playing, at least from time to time, because it doesn't really make sense. So my guess, I might be completely wrong, but I think he had a solo tuning, Viennese tuning for sure. And then for some things, like when you look at his chamber music, he goes very low. He goes to the really low register, and you see in some of his pieces, you see fingerings, and you think, I wonder, that looks more like a tuning in fourths. So, but these people were experimenting all the time, and that's interesting too, because when you have a concerto for bass, the bass reads in D. always in D. Even if it's in E major or in E flat, the bass player reads in D, he just tunes the instrument high. It's like solo tuning. But the orchestra has to play in this more difficult key of E flat, for instance. And they have these forked fingerings on the flutes and the different, more awkward and a more subdued sound for the orchestra, which makes a soloist ring out even more, because not only he's higher, but for him it's easy because he's playing in D. So he's got all the advantages of playing with open strings and stuff. So he has the bright sound, and the orchestra has to get a more subdued sound because it's more difficult with E flat, and you got 3 flats, and it's less bright. So that was one of the reasons. Yeah,
that makes so much. I never thought about that until right now. That makes so much sense, doesn't it? That the orchestra would be having, it wouldn't be ringing in the way that
no. They had,
yeah.
Exactly. They didn't have all these open strings, and they didn't have the same easy fingerings and bright sound. That it kind of covers down the orchestra bit. And the soloist, on the other hand, he can really sing, because not only he's in the easy key of D, but it's a semitone or a tone higher even. So wow, so he really comes up above the orchestra.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you've answered some questions for me with that. That's really cool. That makes a ton of sense.
Yes.
I'm so excited to check out more of this Sperger project. That's really cool that you're going through, because I just there's a composer I'm aware of, and I've done some work with the Sperger competition even, but I really haven't heard a whole lot of his music. I've been starting to read more about him and his background, but that's so 18 concertos, is that
18 concertos?
Wow.
Yes,
it's incredible.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's incredible, and the ones I have played through until now, they're all absolutely breathtaking. They're so good, and they're so different. You would think Viennese tuning is all going to be the same, but he's really doing his utmost best to get a different tonality, and he goes to the minor, and he goes to faraway tonalities within the limits of the instrument, of course. But he always finds something new. He said, "Wow, that's great," and I think he was a good composer, because there's one cantata that was played a few years ago and was recorded. I think it's on YouTube even, a cantata by Sperger. And everybody that I play it to, they can't guess who it is. They think, there's no Bach, no? No, it's period of Bach, no? It sounds so beautiful. It's like, I can't compare it to Bach, Matthew Passion, and these, but it's in this kind of style, and you would never guess it was written by a bass player. That too is such. Of course, there are composing bass players today, but these people were really complete musicians. He also played the organ. I think he wrote a method for the organ. I mean, these were complete musicians. Now, when you say you're a bass player, and sometimes it happens, somebody who doesn't know about music, you walk with your bass. You play the guitar and all that. It's a cello. No, it's a bass. So you play the bass. And what else? Just the bass. But back then that didn't exist. You didn't have a bass player, or people played different instruments. You played the bass and the bassoon, and you played keyboards, or you played the violin and the viola, and you played 3 or 4 instruments. Yeah. Now we play 1 instrument.
Yeah, it's interesting how specialized we've become, because you think back to that, you played multiple instruments, maybe you conducted, you composed, you taught, you were an impresario, you were selling the tickets or creating the event. It's interesting how musicians these days that do a lot of different things, they might think that this is new. This is the oldest form of being a musician that there is.
Yes. It's a never-ending fascination for me to really imagine what these people did. They worked as copyists. Yeah. I can't write a score like, I can read it, but I don't think anyone else can read it.
Yeah.
But these people, it was part of their profession to copy professionally, to copy music professionally, and to write beautifully. And we can't do that anymore. There's
another thing that it's almost impossible to fathom in today's technological world, the amount of work that in an age where there are certainly no photocopiers, and certainly no Finale or Sibelius to help us out. It's incredible.
And then it makes you think, for instance, There were no cars. There was no public transport to speak of. He had to take care of his cow, and he had to work. And where did he find the time to practice these things? Because, I mean, sometimes for one of these Sparger concertos, I mean, some of them I'm working on for 3 or 4 months, and they're still not even close for my taste. So how did they do that?
I know.
How the hell did they do that? He played the organ and teaching and taking care of the animals and copying stuff, and very often they even had services to perform for the king or for the whatever. They were part of the staff, you know. When the prince or the bishop said, "Well, Sperger, can you?" Oh, yeah, sure. Yes. How did they do it?
Mm-hmm.
It's
a great. If only we could take a time machine back and see. That's why I was thinking about sitting in that hall Paganini used to play in Lucca. You know, like what a.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you for days. I want to be respectful of your time, but we definitely. I have people back on the show multiple times. I would love to do a round 2 about anything. Maybe as you start to conclude this Sperger project, maybe we could talk about that.
No, we're just beginning.
Yeah, right. So maybe as that progresses, keep me posted. And
oh yes, we will. Yeah, absolutely.
I will. I'll put this out. So I have a podcast, so I'll put the audio out for this, and I'm starting to do these lives of the great bassists kind of videos. So I'll probably sprinkle in a couple clips from you talking about some of these people. So
I'll keep you posted. Yeah.
Okay, for sure.
Absolutely.
And I love these Vanhal Tapes videos that you did with I'm forgetting his name, but the Venezuelan bassist
Jose Andres Reyes. Yeah. He's a great player and he's a great guy. You know, he's wonderful.
Well, I'll be
He's
sure.
from El Sistema, you know.
Okay.
I've met some people who come from this system, and he's really exceptional.
Yeah. Well, that's such an inspiring system, and it's so cool. That was my first encounter with him, but that was really. I'll make sure to link up to those videos too, and everything. I really appreciate you spending some time and chatting. It's been super fun.
It's been great. I've been talking too much, and I didn't let you talk enough.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
when I'm on my subject and in my passion, I could go on. You know, I could go on forever.
Korneel, thank you so much. Folks, I put out a video about Dittersdorf and used a bit of this interview with Korneel. I will almost certainly use this in some future videos. If you want to check that out or any of the other video projects we've been doing here at Contrabass what's the URL? Oh, YouTube.com. That's right. /Contrabass Conversations, or it's linked up to on our site. Wow. That was so much fun for me to chat with Korneel. Meta Hodos, I think that's how you pronounce it, is the book that he has put together, over 500 pages or around 500 pages. Oh my goodness. I have that linked up to in the show notes. I do hope that doesn't crash his server if too many people download it, because I do think it's a large file, 500 megabytes or 600 megabytes, these really high resolution images and such. Boy, I had a great time doing this. Korneel and I could chat every single week and not run out of things to talk about. So there will be a round 2 for sure. Thank you so much for listening to this. I record these intros and outros in batches. This is 1 of 4, and I have a hard out in 35 minutes, so that shouldn't be a problem to record these. I hope I don't talk that long. It's a beautiful day here in San Francisco. It's about 52 degrees Fahrenheit, and I just took the dog for a walk, and now recording these. I'm in the middle of doing a few interviews today. I just wrapped up one with Stephen Street, who is a bassist in the UK, has worked with many groups like the Bournemouth Symphony, David Daly's, the principal bass of that group, with the Royal Philharmonic, and it's a rough time to be a freelancer for sure right now, but Stephen has been getting way into publishing, so we're talking about that. I've got an interview coming up now in 35 minutes with Marshall Harridge, who is a jazz bassist in Canada, grew up in Vancouver and went to school in McGill in Montreal. I'm not actually sure if he's in Montreal or Vancouver, where he is right now. He was posting some photos of him on the beach, which would probably be Vancouver, but that might have been a while ago. So anyway, lots to come for sure. If you aren't following us on your social media platform of choice, You can find us that's all linked up to in the website. I have been thinking about starting a TikTok for this because I'm doing TikTok for a company that I work for. If you want us on TikTok, let me know. I think I'll put this little question here at the end of the episode. If anybody responds or more than one person responds in the affirmative, I'll do it. Otherwise, I might not. Thank you so much to the team that puts these episodes together. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Mitch Mooring makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and you're going to be hearing an episode with him on the podcast soon. That'll probably be coming in the next round of episodes. I am your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life at the low end of the spectrum.